When you're working with dyes, one of the things you need to have are gloves. It doesn't matter if you use like doctor gloves or if you're using the rubber gloves, that you used for cleaning. It doesn't matter, but you don't want to get the dye on your hands. It is mildly toxic. It's not a big deal to get it on your hands. It's not going to hurt you, but it does stain your hands, and your hands look funny for days. Okay. So when you're working with dyes, when you're dyeing, wear gloves. Also, when you're mixing dyes, the particles of dye will get in the air. You don't want to breathe them in. So face masks are usually a good idea.
Okay.
If you do a long day of dyeing where you're mixing dyes every so often and you're not wearing a mask, one day I went to the bathroom after not using a mask and blew my nose, and it looked like a unicorn was bleeding all over the sink. It was disgusting. So make sure to wear a mask to keep from inhaling dye, because it's not good for you. So we're going to go through and mix up some bright aqua here, and then we're going to dye up do some immersions, and talk about pots. Okay. And a couple of things, pitfalls with pots.
Pitfalls, so,
I don't know if you guys can hear me well through this mask.
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay.
While you get ready, I just had a comment here that might be useful to other viewers. Might want to let the viewers know that they have to allow cookies for Chatwing. My browser blocks them, and I couldn't see this at all until I changed that. So double check if you're not seeing the chat going. That might be the reason. Thank you very much for telling us that. Do you do your own roving? And if you do, what with pre-soak? Could you ask that again, please?
Yes, on every technique except for one, I pre-soak everything.
You pre-soak everything. So
everything.
Maybe that's the answer. Okay.
So, and we are going to go over that technique where I don't.
Okay, good.
We're going to do that. I think it's tomorrow. So, okay. So when you're mixing up dyes, the recommendations I think on every dye, from every dye company is to use measuring cups. I don't really, measuring spoons. I don't really like to use measuring spoons personally. I brought them to show you guys, but my preference is to do everything by weight. Okay. So to do that, you can either use measuring spoons or you can use a scale. And when you're mixing up dye, it needs to be a scale that goes to at least 0.1 grams.
At least 0.1 grams.
Yeah, and do everything in metric. I mean, even if it's 4 ounces of fiber or yarn, that's 114 grams. Put everything into metric. It'll save you a lot of headache when you try and scale things up and down, looking for colors. If you do everything in metric. Okay. So, all right. One thing about mixing dyes, one of the most popular things for people to do is to buy the bottles from the dye houses, the distributors, okay, where you buy things like dyes and dyables and stuff. Those bottles have a tendency of having a lot of plasticizers in them. They're really squishy. They do not hold up to hot water. So if you mix dye in those bottles, shake it up, you'll end up distorting your bottles. Plus they're $2.50, $3 a bottle to buy those. Whereas if you go to your local grocery store and get your sports drinks in the 32-ounce bottle size, these things hold up to hot water. You get the privilege of drinking the wonderful liquid out of them first. Out of them first, and they last forever. Okay, so sports bottles are the best way to go for mixing your dye. So we're gonna, okay. Typically, with most of the dyes, you're going to be looking at somewhere between 4 and 14 grams of dye per 32-ounce bottle.
Okay, can you repeat that so they can write that down?
Between 4 and 14 grams per 32-ounce bottle of dye. Okay. and that will dye up about a pound of fiber or yarn. Okay? So, and when you're moving, move slow with the dye. You don't want to get this stuff in the air. I just got some on the table. So, because you don't want to get this stuff airborne and going through the house and then getting everyone sick. So, move slow.
So it's a good thing to do when the kids are not home.
Yeah, don't mix dye next to your kids.
Yeah.
It's not a good idea. And don't leave dye in these bottles if you've got small children, because if they think that it's Gatorade, if they think it's a sports drink, not supposed to say that. Okay. There's a possibility they'll pull the bottle off the shelf, start drinking it, and then you're calling the poison control center and taking your kid to the emergency room.
Careful.
So don't mix up dye, leave it in a bottle with small children. Okay. So almost hot boiling water. We've got our dye, and I just violated a rule. Typically, you want to have a little bit of water in the bottom of your bottle before you put the dye in. It creates less dust in the air, and you get a little bit more even dissolving of the dye if there's water in the bottle before it goes down.
So just an inch of water before, right?
Like half an inch.
Okay.
So you don't need very much. Pour some water in. Grab the top, shake it. Point the bottle away from yourself and away from everybody else. Vent the bottle. Sounds like, you're opening a can of soda. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it builds up a lot of pressure in the bottle. And one of the benefits of using these bottles is if you grab the lid here when you're shaking it, you don't burn your hands with this hot water. So what you want to look for in the bottle is all of the dye dissolved. And once all the dye is dissolved, you can go through, fill up the rest of it with lukewarm or cold water, and you're good to go. When you're mixing dye within these types of bottles, Sharpies are your friend. Right on the outside of the bottle and on the top of the lid, the number or the name of the dye color that you're using. The reason you do both of them is when you have a bunch of these bottles out.
Woo.
This is another thing. When you have a bunch of these bottles out at the same time, the last thing you want to do is pick up a lid of the black and put it on a yellow or something. At that point, you've ruined your dye.
That's a very good tip. Avoids a lot of headache. So what happened? You had too much pressure there?
So what happens is you have the hot water in the bottle and you screw the lid on all the way and you leave it. The pressure drops as the liquid cools down and caves the bottle in. So what I just did, don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay?
But that's the cool part about being live, is that when you're doing and learning things, these things happen. So you just saw one of the things that you have to avoid. Don't start talking while there's pressure.
So at this point, you fill it up with water and you're good to go. You can let most dyes sit for up to about a month before they start doing weird things like changing colors, shifting colors, and there are some problematic colors where they do weird things, other weird things as well.
So about a month is their lifespan.
Try not to have anything in a bottle mixed up longer than a month. I have, on a couple of occasions, done a couple of experiments where I've left some of these dyes out in the sun for months at a time just to see what would happen. This particular dye that I've been using, they're quite stable. I used another dye company's dyes, and they do color shift. They do weird things, especially in sunlight. So when you mix up dyes, when you have your dyes, even in the jars, your pantry, dark cold closet, you know, the temperature controlled closet is the best place to have your dyes. So, okay. All right.
David, what's the name of your Facebook page? It's Sugar House Dyes.
Sugar House Woolworks.
Sugar House Woolworks. I bet you guys want to know which dye he just talked about, and you can post there, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. You can ask me. You can ask me on the Facebook page. I'll
yeah,
answer the question.
and he will answer that for you.
Okay. So, in general, when you're looking for dye equipment, restaurant supply companies and warehouses are your best friends. So, you know, bulk warehouses. You guys know what I'm talking about. And restaurant supply companies. Things that you want to avoid when you're buying pots, if you're more than just a little casual with dyeing, stay away from aluminum pots. They have problems. The acid and the dyes, after a while, start pitting the inside of your pots. You're going to end up with the inability to do immersions of yarns in your pots because they will start snagging your yarns. So stay away from pots like this one if you want to do immersions as a general rule, because they start pitting, they start snagging your fibers, and you have problems. So stainless steel is fantastic, but for steam setting yarns and fibers, these pots are great. So they do have their uses, you just can't really submerge fibers and yarns in these things after a while because they get pitted. So I got this one at a restaurant supply company. It's just a regular pot and a grate to go on the bottom. A lot of people use tamale steamers. If you get one of these, you can dual purpose the pot as long as it doesn't get pitted on the inside. So you can save a little bit of money that way by getting one of these pots with these little grates that go on the bottom for steam setting yarns. So for immersions, if you want to do an immersion and get a really even yarn, you fill up a pot that's significantly larger than the yarn or the fiber that you want to dye. If you stuff the pot full of stuff, you're creating barriers with your yarn and your fiber. If it's touching the side of the wall and it stays there, you've eliminated the ability for a yarn or a fiber to get touched by the dye on the outside. So you'll end up with what are essentially barrier type dyed yarns. And they do have their place, they are pretty, but if you're going for a really nice even yarn, you've got to have a lot of space inside your pot as compared to how much fiber or yarn you put in it. So keep that in mind when you're buying pots. If you want to do really even stuff, your pot has to be pretty big. So you fill up your pot up to is about as high as you want, feel like you need space for. Pre-soak your yarn or your fiber in water, no acid, just straight water. Pour your dye into your dye pot. Let it go for at least a half an hour with no acid in it. Let it simmer to get all of the dye dissolved and moving through the pot at an even rate. Then you put in your fiber or your yarn that you want to dye. You let it sit. You move it about every 10 minutes or so. Just stir it gently to get things moving around. An hour after it's been in the pot, you put in your acid. If you put in your acid before the dye has had a chance to go through the yarn and the fiber, you're going to cause color breaks, if the color will break, and you'll cause uneven dyeing. So if you want it to be consistent, you've got to be really careful about making sure that the fiber is moving and that the acid isn't added too early, or you're going to end up with a semi-solid yarn or fiber as opposed to a solid.